Okay, welcome back, Hadley. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to create a frequency table. Before we know how to do that, we need to know what the word frequency means, right? Frequency is just the number of times that something occurs, okay? So that could be as simple as me counting, for example, and saying to myself, okay, uh, in this situation here, in this bowl of fruit, I have apples, I have oranges, I have grapes, and I have pears, right? The frequency of apples is just the number of apples that occur. And in this case, I can see 2. So my frequency would be 2. Oranges would be 1. Grapes, I'm going to count them by the bunch. So I would say I have 1 bunch. And pears, I can see that I have 1. That's all that frequency means. When we're talking about data and we're collecting data, we count frequency as the number of times something occurs. So for example, if I'm creating a survey and I want to ask people a specific question, the number of time each person answers the question would be considered 1 towards my frequency. So let's get started by creating a table, just kind of like how I created a simple one on the side here. I'm going to use one that's a little bit more complex. I want to create a survey that looks at the question, what is your favorite genre of movie? Okay, so you can see that I drew up a table here. If you were doing this on paper, it would be much the same thing. You would just use your ruler to help you out to draw these lines. But I'm looking at the question, the survey question, what is your favorite movie genre? That's the information I want to gather. That's the data that I want to gather. Okay, in order to do that, I'm going to have to go out and find some people to ask the question to. So let's assume that I go to around the school during lunchtime in the cafeteria to Hadley and Philman students, and I ask them this question, and I give them a choice of different categories: horror, comedy, drama, action, romantic comedy, and science fiction. Okay, and I want to know what they have to say. So they can only choose one. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to gather the data, and I'm going to gather the data with a tally mark. Okay, what does that mean, a tally mark? Well, all it is a little line that gets drawn down like this. Every time someone answers a question, I draw a little mark to say that, okay, that's what their favorite is. So in this case, one person has put horror. Every time I get 5 answers, I'm going to use it to draw a line sideways. So watch what I mean by that. That's 4 people that have answered. Now I'm going to cross off that line to make 5. The reason that I do that is because it's very easy to group numbers by 5s and count them easily afterwards. For example, it would be much more difficult for me to count up all of these numbers when I can make groups of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then an extra 2. And now I can easily see that my number is 5, 10, 15, 15 and 2 is 17. Okay, so I'm going to fill in the rest of this frequency table, going around the school, answering these questions, and we'll see what we get. Okay, so I'm done my survey. I went around, I asked people, and this is the results. So your tally marks are just the rough sketch of what you have gotten as your data. Now we can see that there's a frequency column. All that means is we're just going to write the number version of our tally marks. So what does that look like? Well, horror, I see I have 5, 10, 15, 17. So my frequency is 17. Comedy, I see I have 5, 10, 15, 16. Frequency 16. Frequency 7. 5, 10, 15, 20, 21. 5, 10, and 4 is 14. And I have 20 on the dot here. Okay, so that's my frequency. Underneath, you can see a total. What I want to do now is add everything up to figure out how many people I actually surveyed in total. So I'm going to use a calculator to figure that out now. So in total, I surveyed 95 people. Okay, so in total, when I added these up, I got 95. In other words, I've surveyed 95 people in my whole survey. So next, I can see that I have a decimal column and a percentage column. Basically, what I'm saying, I know that a decimal is one way to represent a part of a whole. We learned that earlier this year. Just like I know that a fraction is one part or one way to represent a part of a whole. I have some number in the numerator that tells me how many parts I have, and my denominator tells me how many parts are in the whole thing. I can actually make a fraction from the numbers that I have in these categories. For example, if I know that 17 people wrote that they have their favorite movie is horror, that would be 17 out of 95 people. So that's my fraction. And I know that I can turn that into a decimal by dividing my numerator by my denominator. 17 divided by 95 is going to give me 0.17894, blah, 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 very long number. I'm going to round 0.178947 to 2 decimal places, which would make it 0.18. So my decimal is 0.18. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and fill that out for the rest of my data here. Okay, so you can see that I've filled out all my decimals, I did all my divisions down here, and I'm left with a total. Well, because I know that decimals are parts of a whole thing, I can expect that when I add all of these decimal numbers up, I should get 1, because that would tell me that I have one complete whole, right? So let's see what I do, or let's see what I get when I add these up. I get exactly 1. Perfect. So last but not least, in my frequency table, I have a column that says percent. And just like we learned how do we go from fraction to decimal, we actually learned how do we go from decimal to percent. So the way that we do that is we take our decimal and we multiply it by 100, because percent means out of 100, how much do I have? Another way of saying that for this is, instead of having 95 people, what if I had 100 people? How many would prefer, in this case, horror? So I'm going to take my part, which is 0.18, and multiply it by my whole, which is 100, to get 18%. I'm going to fill out the rest of the table in the same way. And if you're wondering how I can do that so quickly, the answer is, I remember that when I am multiplying by 100, that's the same thing as me moving the decimal over twice. So it becomes very easy for me to just move over the decimal twice and get 100 and get my percentage. Last but not least, I can do the same thing for my total. I should expect that if I add all of these numbers up, I should get exactly 100%, because 1 times 100 is equal to 100%. So that is a good way of double checking that I've done this right.